Happy day all, I am Dr. R. Chandini, Department of Commerce from program M.Com. So today we are going to discuss about the topic Essence of Inquiry, a Systematic Approach to Research. So to begin with the presentation, let's move on to the next slide. Outline of the presentation. I have given the presentation as a 4 segments. So to begin with the first slide, it goes from crack the curiosity. So research is all about starting a spark with a curious question, and also it draws to an effective conclusion at the end. So I have so today we are going to dive into the topic, the process of research, and also the meaning of research and its significance towards the effective decision making process. Cracking the code of curiosity. The name itself denotes research is all about a simple idea that comes out of a curiosity of an individual or a peer group. So research starts from a question which involves how or why or where or when it happens. So it all starts with a question and it drives to the research process, and ultimately it reaches to an evidence-based decision making process. So research is a systematic approach where an individual conducts a literature review. After conducting the process, it will ultimately reach to a key findings of the research and draws to a conclusion at the end of the research study. And also research relevance itself from theory to trade, which means research doesn't limit itself to a single discipline, and it works across the discipline and multiple disciplines. Research starts from the theoretical foundation and it helps in the business decision making process, and it also helps to drive innovation and development in that particular domain, and also it contributes to generate and advance the knowledge contribution towards a particular domain or in the multiple domains. And also it helps us to solve the particular problem, to make an informed decision with the evidence-based empirical data. So it plays a vital role and crucial role across the disciplines. So moving on to the next slide. Significance of research. So research doesn't limit itself to a single domain, as I have mentioned in the previous slide. So research is helpful in the innovation and development process, and also it serves not only in the existing knowledge but also helps to expand the knowledge, and it helps an individual to contribute itself to the expanding knowledge across the disciplines. And also it gives us an important significance of a research is evidence based decision making, whereas the decision making based in the research is based on the empirical data or the evidence that a researcher is being collected from through the sources, either from the primary source or from the secondary source. And also research gives a primary impact in the social and also in the economic basis, and research plays a vital role and crucial role in shaping up the economy and the society in a vast manner. It helps the society to make the informed effective decision making with the evidence based research process. To dive into the topic called the process of research, the process of research comprises of 7 major steps. Starts from the question, identifying the problem, and towards the end drawing the conclusion with the key findings and the solution. To break down the process, let's dive on to the first major step in the research process, which states that identifying the problem is the first major step in the research process, where the researcher has to identify the research problem or any problem which occurs in the real life or in the practical manner. So the researcher has to fix a problem or identify a problem with a general perspective, and also the researcher has to do overview and theoretical background work about that particular problem. So the researcher has to formulate the problem, and again the second step is going to be reformulate the problem from general perspective to a specific perspective, because the research problem has to be in a specific manner with some clarity, and it has to be concise, and it has to be understandable to the person that they are going to review the research after all the study. Second major step is conducting a literature review. The researcher is going to review all the information about that particular problem that has been formulated at the first stage, and he is going to collect the theoretical foundation which lays as a blueprint of the overall research study that they are going to process on. So which comprises of 3 major steps. The first step is find existing research. The researcher has to find what are the research studies or the journals or the sources or the information which has been already prevalent in the sources, whether it's through the secondary data or through the books or through the any medium of sources. So they has to collect all the necessary information at the first step, and the second stage is going to be the evaluating the research. The researcher is going to evaluate the research ideas and the research, what are the methodologies that has been adopted by the previous researcher in the previous studies, and accordingly he has to formulate the literature review process. Final third stage is called to be as synthesize the research. Synthesize the research is nothing but the researcher is going to comprise all the information that has been gathered by the previous researcher or the previous sources, and he is going to summarize in a paragraph manner which has to be understandable to the reader of the study. So, after completing the 3 major studies, the researcher will get an overview about the overall research that they are going to proceed on to the further investigation. So, with that, with the help of the literature review, he can able to form what is called to be a research gap, and what is the area that the researcher has to focus on what is the methodology that they are going to adopt, and what is the mode that the data is going to be collected. Everything will be framed based on the literature review process. The third step is formulating hypothesis. Hypothesis is nothing but a statement or a prediction or an assumption of a researcher that will be helping the researcher to formulate and to investigate in the testing process by using the statistical method and the softwares. Basically, hypothesis is comprises of both independent variable and dependent variable, and also it helps the researcher to predict the relationship between 2 variable or 2 or more variable, and also hypothesis is helpful to know what is there any impact or the cause and effect happens between 2 or more variables. So, with the help of the hypothesis, the researcher can very well able to test and validate whether the research is going at the right path, and also to provide empirical evidence based decision making process. To formulate the hypothesis, the researcher should have framed a specific problem, and after conducting the literature review, the researcher should know what are the dependent variable and the independent variable that has to be studied on and that has to be focused on the research study that he is going to implement. And also, hypothesis is termed to be as 2 major types. One is null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. In research term, it terms that if the null hypothesis is accepted, the alternate hypothesis is rejected. When the null hypothesis is rejected, the alternate hypothesis is accepted. Types of research methodology. So, types of research methodology is nothing but the researcher has to adopt what are the methods or methodology or the blueprint is going to be carried on towards the further investigation of the research process. So, research methodology basically comprises of types of researchers, which includes some major types such as qualitative research, quantitative research, applied research, and also mixed method. So, whereas quantitative research deals with numerical data interpretation, which comprises of all the numerical patterns, whereas qualitative research deals with in-depth insights about that particular theoretical foundation. It does not deals with any numerical pattern or the numerical data. So, and also the researcher can able to adopt any one of the researches, either qualitative or quantitative or basic or applied, or the researcher can able to adopt both the mixed methods. Data collection plays a vital role in the whole on the whole research process, because the researcher has to provide evidence based data in order to provide an informed effective decision making process. So, the data collection may be happen by using primary data or through the secondary data, whereas primary data is all about collecting the information or the sources as a primary end, that is a first hand information that has been gained from the respondents. So, respondents are nothing but the individual who is going to respond to the questions which is going to raised by the researcher by himself. So, say for example, so primary data can be collected by way of distributing the questionnaires through online or offline mode. Anyway, it has to be directly connected to the respondent that they are going to distribute the questionnaires. So, questionnaire comprises of set of questions which they may be open ended and close ended, and can also be added with some suggestions, and the questionnaire has to be distributed to the respondents and their target population in order to collect the responses from the respondents. Based on the responses, the researcher will be moving on to the next further investigation process, and they can able to validate what are the responses that has been collected from the respondents. Secondary data collection means collecting the informations or sources which is already prevailing in the e-websites or sources of books, or the researcher may get the secondary data by referring through the e-journals or by books or vlogs or blogs, anything which is related to the core area that has been selected by the researcher himself. So, secondary and also the researcher can able to adopt both the primary and the secondary data process in order to get much more effective process and investigation at the end of the study. Next we are moving on to the next session is data analysis part. In the data analysis part, the researcher will be evaluating what are the data that has been collected from the respondents, whether it can be a primary data or it can be a secondary data or comprising of both the type of data. So what in the data analysis part, the researcher will be validating the data that has been collected. So by adopting some particular method or test based on the hypothesis that has been formulated by the researcher. So some of the software that helps the individual in order to process all the data that has been collected if it is in a vast manner is SPSS, M.O.P and also R-square. So these are the software that can be adopted by an individual in order to validate or test the responses that has been adopted from the primary and secondary data. So based on that evidence, based on that answers, based on final output that is going to be arrived out of this particular data analysis process is going to be the key findings or conclusion of that overall study. So data analysis part plays a major role in the research in order to provide evidence based solution or the findings at the end of the study. And also the researcher will be visualizing the data and he has to interpret the data and the responses in a coding manner. So they have a separate coding process that has to be done by using the software or through manually. Say for example, in order to find out the relationship between two or more variables, the researcher can able to adopt the correlation analysis. In order to evaluate the impact or cause and effect of a particular or two or more variables, the researcher can able to adopt regression analysis. So based on the responses and based on the set of questions on based of the objectives of the study, the researcher can able to adopt any one of the analysis or more analysis in order to provide the evidence based findings and the conclusion from the overall study. After conducting all the research process, the researcher will come to the conclusion point, whereas the researcher connects all the points, all the process in a significant manner. The researcher will aim objectives of studies and he has to recheck whether the objectives of the studies is correlating with the hypothesis framed, and the hypothesis has to be correlated with the research cap that has been framed, and overall the study has to be correlated with the findings or the summary of findings that they have been received after testing that particular responses from the respondents. So drawing conclusion plays a vital role because it also provides a source of scope for the further research which has to be done by the future researcher who is being interested in that particular domain or area of interest. And also drawing conclusion plays a vital role, and the conclusion has to be in a clear, precise manner. To wrap up this research story, I have given an instance which comprises of all the research process that we have discussed now, starting from identifying the research problem and drawing the conclusion after formulating to a research report. So here I have given an instance to know to understand, an organization wants to understand what is the work-life balance of an employee working in that particular organization. So this is called to be as identifying a problem because the organization wants to understand what an employee is going through and where is the sales is getting declined or the productivity is getting declined. So the problem has to be identified in such a manner. It can be a real experience or through a practical era. So here the problem has been identified as an organization wants to understand what is the work-life balance and the challenges faced by an individual who is working in that particular organization. So based on the research problem that has been formulated by the researcher, the further steps will be moving on. So here the literature review can be adopting by using what are the factors that can be contributed to the work-life balance of an individual who is working in that particular organization, and what is the method, what is the major conflicts that has been facing by an employee in order to move on to the effective productivity of that particular organization. So after completing the review of literature, here choosing the research design plays a vital role. So for that instance, the researcher can able to use the correlation research design. So the next process is selecting a sample method. After reaching this point of identifying the research problem, the researcher will prepare a set of questions which has to be asked to the employees who are working in that particular organization in order to understand what is the real problem that has been faced by that particular individual in that organization. The sample population will be the total number of employees who is working in that particular organization, and the sample size will be how many of them are facing the conflicts or challenges for balancing the work as well as the personal personal life in a real manner. For data collection process can be through online or through offline manner, and also it can be done with a case study basis, and also the researcher himself can sit in an interview process and get to know deep more insights about what are the conflicts that has been arising in the particular organization. And after collecting the data from the primary sources and also from the secondary sources, they can move on to the key findings and what is the suggestions that has to be implemented in the organization in order to promote the organizational effectiveness and the productivity in such a manner. Thank you for listening. Hope you understood. For further more insightful lessons, kindly do like, share and subscribe M.O.P Classroom. Thank you.